Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's start today's episode. Dorothy Arnold. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold was born on July 1, 1885, in New York City. As a socialite and heiress, she came from a prominent and affluent family. Her father, Francis Rose Arnold, was a successful importer of luxury goods, specializing in perfumes, and he and her mother, Mary Martha Parks Arnold, had 4 children together. Dorothy was their second child, with an older brother named John and 2 younger siblings, Marjorie and Dan. Dorothy attended the prestigious Velton School for Girls in New York and later graduated from college in 1905, where she studied literature and language. After finishing her education, she remained at home, focusing on launching a writing career. Writing was Dorothy's true passion, and she was determined to become a published author. Unfortunately, those closest to her, including her family and friends, did not support her artistic ambitions. Dorothy's literary ambitions were often met with ridicule from her family and peers, particularly when her work was rejected by publishers. In the spring of 1910, she received a rejection from McClure's magazine for a short story she had submitted. A few months later, another piece was turned down by the same publication. These repeated disappointments deeply affected Dorothy. Though she tried to maintain a cheerful facade, some believe that the lack of support and ongoing rejection may have played a role in her eventual disappearance later that year. On December 12, 1910, Dorothy left her home around 11 a.m., telling her mother she planned to shop for a dress for her sister Marjorie's upcoming debutante ball. Her mother, Mary, unusually offered to join her, despite often being in poor health. Dorothy politely declined, saying she'd call if she found a suitable dress. She left with approximately $25 to $30 in cash, equivalent to $700, $800 today. Dorothy was seen walking from her home on 79th Street to the Park and Tilford store at 5th Avenue and 27th Street, where she charged a half box of chocolates to her father's account. She then went to Brentano's bookstore, where she purchased a humorous book titled Engaged Girls Sketches by Emily Blake. Staff at the bookstore later stated that Dorothy behaved normally and showed no signs of distress. While not in high spirits, she was polite and pleasant, and nothing seemed amiss. When she left the bookstore, Dorothy ran into an old friend of hers, a woman named Gladys King. The pair chatted for a bit discussing the upcoming debutante party, and much like the bookstore staff, Gladys found her friend was talkative and seemed in a stable mood. They then parted ways as Gladys was meeting her mother for lunch. Dorothy mentioned that she would walk home through Central Park. She was last seen at 27th Street just before 2 p.m., waving goodbye. Dorothy's family grew suspicious when she did not return home for dinner. This was highly uncharacteristic of the 25-year-old, as she would never miss it without at least informing someone in the family first. Not wishing to draw too much attention to themselves, the family called around Dorothy's friends asking if anyone had seen her. They told her they had not. Just after midnight, a friend rang the family back asking if she had been found. Mary, who answered the call, told her that yes, Dorothy was back home. When the friend asked to speak to her, however, Mary refused, saying that her daughter had gone off to bed with a headache. Unfortunately, valuable time in Dorothy's case was lost when the family did not immediately report her disappearance. Fearing the unwanted media attention and social embarrassment, the Arnolds refused to contact authorities. Instead, the following day, Dorothy's older brother John called the family lawyer and friend John S. Keith, who came to the house to search for clues. In Dorothy's room, he found personal letters with foreign postmarks, although the nature of these letters is unknown. Keith also discovered 2 brochures for transatlantic ocean liners and remnants of burned papers in the fireplace, which were believed to be Dorothy's rejected manuscripts. Apart from these, nothing unusual was found in her room. Her clothes and personal belongings remained untouched, aside from what she had taken with her the day she vanished. Over the following weeks, Keith conducted an extensive search, visiting jails, hospitals, and morgues across New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, but found no trace of Dorothy. He later informed the press that, 2 months after her disappearance, a lawyer had tipped him off that Dorothy might be in a Pittsburgh sanatorium. He dispatched 2 agents to investigate, but the woman they located was not her. With no solid leads, Keith recommended the family hire the Pinkerton Detective Agency to continue the investigation. The Arnolds agreed, and the agency began checking hospitals and other locations Dorothy had been known to visit. They interviewed her friends and former classmates, but no one had any helpful information. Based on the ocean liner brochures found in her room, the agency speculated that Dorothy might have traveled to Europe to secretly marry someone. However, after combing through marriage records, they found no listing under her name. Agents even traveled out to Europe to check ships that had come in from New York. And although several similar-looking women were found, Dorothy herself was not. At a loose end, the agency along with John Keith suggested that the police finally be called. The family were reluctant to do so but were persuaded in the end. Law enforcement advised the family to hold a press conference to draw in publicity. By this time, 6 weeks had passed since Dorothy was last seen. On January 25, 1911, reporters gathered at the conference to watch Francis Arnold tell the world his daughter was missing. He offered a reward of $1,000, which is the equivalent today of about $17,000. During the events, the press asked if it was possible that Dorothy had run off with a man, considering Francis did not allow her to date, but he denied this and told them that he'd have been glad if she'd associated with more young, busy men, saying, quote, "I don't approve of young men who have nothing to do." This remark was reportedly a jab at a man Dorothy had been seeing for some time before her disappearance. 42-year-old George Grissom Jr., an engineer from a wealthy Pennsylvanian family, had met Dorothy while she was studying at university. Despite his age and wealth, he continued to live with his parents in Pittsburgh. The press was quick to find out all of this information. They also found out that months earlier, in September of 1910, Dorothy had lied to her parents, telling them she was going to visit an old classmate in Boston, but instead spending a week at a hotel with George. Francis and Mary discovered their daughter's lies when they found out she had pawned jewelry for $500 to fund the trip, although it was apparently worth much, much more than that. Although her parents forbade her from seeing George, Dorothy continued to stay in contact with him, with the pair frequently exchanging letters. They saw each other one final time in early November. Before reaching out to the press in January of 1911, the Arnold family had contacted George to find out if he had seen their daughter or knew anything about her whereabouts. He was holidaying in Florence, Italy, so the family sent him telegrams, but George told them he knew nothing about it and denied any involvement. Later that month, on January 16th, Mary and John Arnold took the trip out to George to personally interrogate him. However, he continued to deny knowing anything. They asked him for the letters Dorothy had sent him, but he told him they contained nothing of importance and that he'd already disposed of them. So the family left empty-handed. In the days following the announcement of Dorothy's disappearance, police widely distributed her photo, description, and information throughout America, Canada, and Mexico. The New York Times covered the story on a near-daily basis, with the frenzied publicity leading to sightings all across the United States. These leads were always thoroughly investigated but often proved to be false. At some point during this, the Arnold family received 2 ransom notes from alleged kidnappers demanding $5,000 for their daughter's safe return. The authorities proved both of these to be hoaxes. As the January approached, authorities reported that they believed Dorothy was still alive and that she would return when she was good and ready. However, the Arnolds had already begun to make peace with the idea that their daughter may never return home. Francis Arnold told the press that he believed Dorothy had been attacked and killed while walking home through Central Park and that her body had been thrown into the reservoir. He cited as proof 2 clues that he would not publicly disclose. Police refuted these claims, stating that the winter had been so cold that the reservoir had been frozen over in the days before and after the 25-year-old's disappearance. Nevertheless, the authorities did search the water when it thawed, but they found no trace of Dorothy. In February of 1911, just weeks after the conference, George returned to the United States. When questioned by the press, he simply announced to them that he had every intention of marrying Dorothy whenever she came home again. His only condition was that the couple had her mother's blessing. In response, Mary told reporters that she would never approve of the couple's relationship. Early in February, Frances received a postcard that had a New York postmark on it. It was signed by Dorothy and simply said, quote, "I am safe." While the handwriting matched his daughter's, Frances believed someone had copied it from a newspaper article which had published images of her script, and that it was some sort of cruel joke. Also around this time, a jeweler in San Francisco contacted authorities to let them know a woman he thought resembled Dorothy had come in to ask him to engrave a diamond wedding ring on January 17th. The inscription read, quote, "To A. J. A. From ERB, December 10th, 1910. Nothing further seemed to come from this lead, and it's unknown if this woman was Dorothy. Later that month, the San Francisco Chronicle published an article about several hotel clerks who'd been working where George had been staying on holiday. The staff members told the paper that they'd seen a veiled female who resembled Dorothy during George's stay. The pair were spotted having an earnest talk that they couldn't hear, but they noted that the woman looked greatly agitated. In the following months, George spent thousands of dollars placing newspaper ads in which he asked Dorothy to come home. At this point, the New York Police Department announced that they would stop looking for Dorothy, stating their belief that she was dead. There had been no clues, no trace of Dorothy in 75 days. When the authorities continued to look into reported sightings of the 25-year-old, not one of those leads panned out. There is an abundance of theories surrounding Dorothy's odd disappearance. Some believe that she slipped on an icy sidewalk on her way home, struck her head, and ended up with amnesia. But both the Pinkerton Agency and John Keith searched hospitals and there was nobody in there matching Dorothy's description. Others have suggested that she was perhaps drugged and kidnapped, but it's important to note that the 25-year-old went missing in broad daylight from one of the busiest areas in New York, making the case all the more baffling. George Grissom Jr., Dorothy's lover, theorized that the young woman had killed herself due to her failed writing career. After her second short story was rejected, she wrote to him stating, quote, "Failure always stares me in the face. All I can see ahead is a long road with no turning. My mother will always think an accident has happened." While some friends and family believe she took her own life, many thought it was due to her crumbling relationship with George rather than her writing career. One of the main theories in many of these old cases is the idea of a botched abortion in which Dorothy died and her body was disposed of without any of her friends or family knowing. This was given some credibility when in April of 1916, police raided an illegal Pennsylvania clinic. The clinic was in the basement of a home named the House of Mystery due to the number of women who visited there and never returned. The clinic was run by Dr. Meredith. Another doctor by the name of Dr. Lutz told the district attorney that Dr. Meredith had told him that Dorothy had died there after complications during the procedure, and that like many other women, her body had been burned in the furnace. While the DA believed him, Frances Arnold believed the story was ridiculous and absolutely untrue. That very same month, a convicted felon named Edward Glennorris who was imprisoned in Rhode Island for attempted extortion told an extraordinary tale to the prison warden claiming he'd been paid $250 to bury the body of a young woman in December of 1910. He said an acquaintance of his who went by Little Louie had hired him to drive a woman to and from several locations. At a home in New York, Edward and Louie met two men, one who went by the name of Doc and one who was well-dressed and appeared wealthy. This man matched the description of George Jr. The men loaded the unconscious woman into the car and took her to a home in New Jersey. During the drive, Little Louis told Edward that the woman was named Dorothy Arnold. Edward claimed he recognized Dorothy and confirmed her identity by pointing out the distinctive signet ring she always wore on her left hand. After this, he was dismissed for the day but instructed to return the next morning. When he did, Doc informed him that the woman had died during surgery. Edward, along with young Louis, then transported the body back to New York, wrapped it in sheets, and buried it in the basement of an abandoned house. Although Edward voluntarily confessed this entire story to the prison warden, he later denied all knowledge when questioned by police, refusing to cooperate and feigning confusion. Authorities excavated several nearby properties, but found no evidence or remains. When told about Edward's confession, Francis reportedly dismissed it as utter nonsense. In April 1921, 11 years after Dorothy's disappearance, the case resurfaced in the media. Captain John Ayres of the Bureau of Missing Persons claimed during a New York lecture that both the Bureau and Dorothy's family had long known her fate. He did not clarify whether she was alive or deceased. After intense media backlash, Ayres backtracked the following day, stating he had been misquoted and denying any prior knowledge of her fate. Although a wealth of information surrounds Dorothy's case, the numerous competing theories make it nearly impossible to identify one definitive explanation. All reported sightings of Dorothy in the years following her disappearance were ultimately debunked. Various women wrote to the Arnold family claiming to be their missing daughter, but each was proven to be an imposter. At one point, a California lawyer alleged that Dorothy was living in Los Angeles under the name Ellen Evans, though Francis Arnold strongly rejected this claim. In the immediate aftermath of Dorothy's vanishing, Francis reportedly spent around $250,000 on efforts to locate her, equivalent to over $6 million today. Until his death on April 6, 1922, Francis remained convinced that Dorothy had either been kidnapped or killed shortly after disappearing. In his will, he left no inheritance for his missing daughter, stating plainly that he was satisfied that she is not alive. By contrast, Dorothy's mother Mary continued to hold out hope for her daughter's return, reportedly maintaining that belief until her own death on December 29, 1928. After her passing, John Key stated his belief that Dorothy had taken her own life as a result of her failed writing career. Even today, over a century later, the mystery of Dorothy Arnold remains unanswered. Moving on to the next case. Kimberly Langwell. It was the evening of July 9, 1994. Teenager Tiffany was looking forward to dinner that night. Our mother had called around 5:30 p.m. to tell her she would be home for dinner after a quick stop at her ex-boyfriend's house. Tiffany was okay with it because there was plenty of time before dinner. They were going to be joined by a guest, so there was time to prepare. Little did she know, that was the last time she would hear her mother's voice. 34-year-old single mother, Kimberly Langwell, did not show up for dinner that night. Her new boyfriend, Ken Weatherford, went out looking for her. He found something strange. Her car was abandoned at a pharmacy, yet there was no sign of Kimberly. Where did she go? Kimberly Langwell was born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1965, in Beaumont, Texas, where she spent most of her life. From a young age, her striking appearance drew a lot of attention. At 18, she became pregnant but didn't let that stop her. Determined and resilient, she raised her daughter Tiffany on her own, taking on multiple jobs to provide for them. Eventually, she landed a steady job at a chemical plant, specifically, a mobile oil refinery, which allowed her to quit juggling 3 different jobs. Her focus was always on giving Tiffany the best life possible. Around this time, Kimberly had ended a toxic relationship. Her ex-boyfriend, Terry Rose, later admitted to regretting many aspects of their time together, including his physical abuse toward her. After living together for 7 years, the relationship ended, a decision Tiffany was relieved by, having never supported it from the beginning. But the two remained on civil terms, friends if one could call it that. There are various stories about what really happened between Terry and Kimberly. According to Kimberly's sister, Susan, he was increasingly possessive to the point where Kimberly did not feel safe with him. She even warned her family that if anything happened to her, they should suspect him, as he had threatened her life and exhibited violent behavior. Kimberly had gone as far as providing potential locations where her body might be found if she went missing. But others said Kimberly cheated on him with a friend, causing them to go their separate ways. Yet Terry showered her with expensive gifts. Lovesick, he would give her cash and presents like a $500 vacation trip to Cancun just to get her back. But the trip she said she would go on with girlfriends turned out to be a vacation with a new man. Terry was bitter, but he remained civil. Kimberly was quite openly dating someone new now. Ken Weatherford was a whole new chapter in her life. They worked together and had a much better relationship than what she had with Terry. Kimberly usually got off work at 5 p.m. Between 5:15 and 5:30, she told her daughter she would stop by Terry's house to help him. He was remodeling his house, and Kimberly was going to assist him in hanging up boards. When she left the house for work that day, she was wearing a white shirt with the words Cozumel on the front and a diver on the back. It was a shirt she got from her Cancun trip with Ken. She paired it with blue jeans and white tennis shoes. She wore a silver-toned Seiko watch with glowing numbers on it, and a silver necklace with an angel pendant. She finished her look with silver hoop earrings and a gold wedding band she wore to avoid attention from men. An hour later, Tiffany started to worry. Kimberly was not answering any calls on her cell phone. She always kept her phone nearby. When Kimberly did not arrive home on time, her worried daughter called the ex-boyfriend to inquire about her mother. He claimed Kimberly had already left, and then began angrily questioning Tiffany about why he was not invited to dinner. He showed more concern for the dinner snub than for Kimberly's absence. Tiffany notified Kimberly's current boyfriend, Ken, that her mother never showed up for dinner. Concerned, he went looking for her at local shops, bars, and regular hangouts. He found her 1994 Nissan Altima abandoned at an Eckerd's pharmacy located at the corner of Dowland Road and Flynn Boulevard. Her purse and keys were missing, but her cell phone and other personal belongings were still inside the car, a detail that immediately raised red flags. Kimberly was known to be constantly on her phone, and considering her fear of her ex-boyfriend, it seemed improbable that she would willingly leave it behind, especially if she needed to reach her daughter in an emergency. Despite thorough searches in the area surrounding the abandoned vehicle, no trace of Kimberly was found. In 1999, surveillance cameras weren't as widespread as they are today, so there was no footage available to aid in the investigation. There were no visible signs of a struggle, nor did police release any physical evidence, though they did suspect foul play. The last known person to speak with Kimberly was her daughter, Tiffany, during that final phone call. Since then, no one, family or friends, has heard from her. Her disappearance left the family heartbroken, prompting her brother Norman to take matters into his own hands. He began compiling a personal database of information and potential evidence, determined to uncover what happened to his sister. Family and friends were sure that Kimberly would never have willingly left her daughter, whom she raised on her own and was very close to. Kimberly's siblings, Susan and Norman, tirelessly put up flyers and worked to spread the word about her disappearance. Their efforts were driven by the certainty that Kimberly would not have abandoned her daughter or her life. Dee Dee Keene, a survivor of kidnapping and assault, spent years trying to help Kimberly's family. She and her husband could be seen handing out flyers for Kimberly each year dedicatedly. Penn was quickly ruled out as a suspect since he had alibis and was actively involved in the investigation. But officers focused on Terry Rose, whom she had lived with for 7 years, just 6 months before her disappearance. Terry managed a wrecking yard and towing operation in Beaumont called Terry's Wrecker Service. It was easy to dispose of a body. Initially, he said Kimberly stopped by to help him hang boards. Kimberly had told a friend she would stop by Terry's house to pick up her personal items. Perhaps seeing her in a Cancun shirt reminded him of her betrayal. He had also conveniently told the officers he was home alone before he went to the corner pocket pool hall that shared a parking lot with the Eckerd pharmacy. He went around 9:45 p.m., and so he already had an explanation of why his car might be spotted there. Another suspect was Kimberly's coworker, 49-year-old Frank McCormick. He was a supervisor at the Mobil Oil Refinery and married, yet he had an obsessive infatuation with Kimberly. He wrote her a number of love letters, and in 1999, Kimberly gave those letters to a friend for safekeeping. He offered her thousands of dollars so that she could take a trip to Europe with her daughter. Yet he was cleared as a suspect as well after years of investigation. He had receipts from 1999 where he bought chips from a grocery store for a poker night with friends. Kimberly's family, particularly her sister, strongly believed that Terry was responsible for her disappearance. Although his name never came up on websites, Susan's blog mentioned him repeatedly as the prime suspect. It all started when she called Terry to inform him of Kimberly's disappearance. His response was bitter and cold. "Good. Now you will see how I feel." Later, he called to announce he was taking a lie detector test, yelling aggressively at the family. 3 months after Kimberly went missing, Terry called the house and in an overly cheerful tone asked if they had heard from Kim lately. This call deeply disturbed the family. In November 2002, he approached Tiffany, Kimberly's daughter, and asked if she had heard from her mother. Kimberly's sister immediately called him to confront his sick behavior. During this call, he revealed that he had failed a lie detector question about whether he had taken the life of Kimberly. Terry's actions, including his insensitive remarks and tormenting behavior, only intensified the family's suspicions and their pain. Despite the lack of concrete evidence tying him to Kimberly's disappearance, they were sure he did it. Shockingly, 5 years after the disappearance of Kimberly, Terry Rose's father was fatally clubbed with a candlestick. He took his last breaths at his door. The assailant was never found. But that seemed irrelevant to detectives. They believed she could have simply been abducted from the pharmacy by a stranger or have been taken by a serial assailant. A new team of investigators started the investigation from the beginning and came across some incriminating information. Reliable information came through in February. A former employee at Terry's Wrecker Service said he saw Kimberly's car on July 9, 1999 at 5:50 p.m. By 6:20 p.m., her car was gone. This was an important piece of information because it placed her near Terry. That same month, a trip to the police would turn out to be the break they were waiting for. The informant, who remained anonymous, said Kimberly was buried at Terry's house. A warrant was obtained to search his wrecking yard and his residence at the 1600 block of Lindbergh Drive. The FBI assisted the police with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The search warrant was executed on Monday, June 10, 2024. The officers found a 3-foot by 5-foot area with no steel rebar under a bedroom floor. The bedroom belonged to Terry's son. It was obviously cut out, and according to the investigators, it was a perfect size for a body to be buried in. The wire and mesh rebar had been cut out. Police found human remains on the property around 3 a.m., Thursday, June 13th. They were hastily wrapped in a blanket. There was not anything left to identify, but the remains were sent to the lab for testing. After all these years of running free while having done something so horrible, Terry Rose's luck was up. He was arrested the very same day. 25 years later, the perpetrator was finally in the grasp of the law. There was nothing to save Terry now. After years of smug remarks and snide comments about Kimberly's disappearance, his arrogance finally caught up with him. Now 67 years old, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, exactly where he belonged. The discovery brought a measure of closure to Kimberly Langwell's family, who could at last lay her to rest properly. Her daughter Tiffany expressed deep gratitude for finally being able to bring her mother home. "I've always known, from the day she disappeared, that she was there," Tiffany said. "It's hard," she added. "It's hard to know where your mom is and not be able to do anything about it." Terry Rose is currently being held on a $1,000,000 bond. If released, he will be required to wear a GPS ankle monitor and will be restricted from leaving Jefferson County. Moving on to the next case. Russell and Rebecca Porter. From the very beginning, it was evident that Russell and Rebecca Porter hadn't just disappeared voluntarily. Their sudden absence, coupled with the fact that all their personal items were left behind, immediately raised alarms. Inside their home, things were in disarray. Clear signs of a struggle suggested that someone had attempted to cover up a violent confrontation. But the most shocking part of the story wouldn't come until later, when the harrowing truth of what happened, and who was responsible, was finally revealed. The revelations would leave many in disbelief. In February, Russell and Rebecca Porter relocated to the quiet, scenic town of Willard, Missouri after Russell inherited a large farmhouse from his grandfather. Known for its low crime rate and small-town charm, Willard seemed like an ideal place for a fresh start. But beneath its peaceful surface, darkness was looming. On April 19th, 2011, concern grew when 46-year-old Rebecca failed to show up for work without any notice, something entirely out of character for her. Calls to Rebecca's phone continued to go unanswered throughout the day. Although her coworkers were concerned, they initially held off on assuming the worst, thinking there must be a reasonable explanation and expecting her to reach out soon. At approximately 9:30 a.m., a neighbor noticed that Rebecca's car was still parked outside the house, a red flag, since she usually left for work by 9 o'clock. Concerned, the neighbor knocked on the porter's door to check in, but received no reply. He brushed it off, thinking perhaps the car had broken down and that Russell had given Rebecca a ride to work. However, by 1 p.m., the situation took a more serious turn. Rebecca's daughter, Jessica, showed up after growing increasingly alarmed by her mother's silence. Unable to reach her by phone, she decided to investigate in person. Around the same time, Rebecca's son, Stephen, also arrived after leaving work early, disturbed by the complete lack of communication from both his mother and stepfather. Together, Jessica and Stephen began circling the house, anxiously peering through the windows for any sign of them. They immediately noticed a significant mess inside, and saw that the mosquito screen on one of the large windows had been cut. The window itself was open. Alarmed, they called law enforcement right away, but refrained from entering the home themselves. When police arrived and entered the house, they were hit by the strong smell of cleaning products containing chlorine. The interior was in disarray with belongings scattered across the floor. The master bedroom was in complete chaos. Signs of a violent struggle were apparent. The mattress had been shifted, a nightstand was overturned, a flower pot and a framed photo were shattered on the ground. However, there was no trace of Russell or Rebecca in the house, leaving a faint hope that they might still be alive. In the bedroom, the odor of bleach was overwhelming. The mattress and carpet had been thoroughly saturated with the chemical, and small puddles of it had collected on the floor. This appeared to be a desperate attempt to eliminate evidence, but until the scene could be properly examined and tested, no definitive conclusions could be drawn. The initial theory was that the crime stemmed from a burglary gone wrong. Investigators determined that an intruder, or possibly multiple intruders, had entered the home through an open window after cutting through the mosquito screen. The assumption was that the intruder planned to steal valuables, but was confronted by the homeowners, leading to a violent struggle. However, this theory quickly unraveled due to several inconsistencies. First, all valuable items and cash were left untouched despite being in plain sight. Second, the house showed no signs of a search. Most of the scattered objects appeared to have been knocked over during the altercation. Lastly, the biggest mystery remained. What had happened to Russell and Rebecca Porter? Rebecca's purse was found on the bedroom floor, still containing her wallet, keys, and bank cards. Her phone lay nearby, its screen shattered, as though someone had stepped on it. A prescription bottle belonging to Russell was also discovered on the floor. According to Rebecca's daughter, Jessica, Russell relied on this medication daily due to a chronic health condition and rarely left the house without it. The only noticeable item missing from the Porter home was the tower from the family's desktop computer, which had been yanked out forcefully, cables and all. Initially, investigators theorized that the thief may have targeted it for sensitive information, perhaps something that could grant access to bank accounts or be used for blackmail. But that theory quickly fell apart. According to Rebecca's children, the computer didn't hold any financial secrets. Instead, it contained something far more critical: footage from the home's elaborate surveillance system. The Porters had installed over a dozen cameras throughout the property, covering nearly every angle, leaving virtually no blind spots. It became clear that the person who broke in was well aware of this and deliberately removed the tower to destroy the evidence of their presence. This revelation raised a chilling new question: what had driven the Porters to implement such an intense level of home security? With few other leads, investigators shifted their attention toward Russell and Rebecca themselves, hoping to uncover more about their lives and what, or who, they might have feared. What they uncovered painted a picture of a relationship that was both recent and unusual. Rebecca had just celebrated her 40th birthday. She had previously been married, and had 2 adult children from that relationship. Russell, on the other hand, was nearly 12 years younger than Rebecca. He had never been married, and didn't have any children. Russell had struggled with severe issues in the past, including substance abuse. He had a long history of alcohol dependence and the use of prohibited substances, which he had relied on heavily for years. He had attended rehab several times, but had repeatedly relapsed. Despite his troubled past, Rebecca became a stabilizing force in Russell's life. She not only accepted him as he was, but actively helped him turn his life around. With her support, Russell agreed to enter a treatment program one more time, and this time, he completed it successfully. Free from his addictions, Russell proposed to Rebecca, and she happily accepted. Despite Rebecca's role in helping Russell turn his life around, his family was far from thrilled about their marriage. They were openly critical of Rebecca, largely due to the significant age difference between her and Russell, and the fact that she had children from a previous marriage. On the other hand, Rebecca's children initially found it difficult to connect with their much younger stepfather, unsure of how to relate to him. The couple was likely no longer alive. But the lingering question remained, who could have done this? Detectives proposed another theory, one that seemed improbable but still plausible enough to investigate. According to this scenario, a domestic dispute between Russell and Rebecca had escalated into a physical altercation. Things turned violent, and the confrontation might have ended in an unintentional killing. This could explain the disarray in the bedroom and the blood stains. It was suggested that Russell may have attacked Rebecca, leading her to defend herself and injure him in the process, or that Rebecca might have been the aggressor. In either case, one spouse could have attempted to cover up what had happened, disposing of the other's body, taking the surveillance system's hard drive, and possibly fleeing the area. When family members of the Porters heard this theory, they were outraged. They vehemently denied that anything of the sort could have happened, insisting that Russell and Rebecca deeply loved each other and had never fought, let alone engaged in physical aggression. Additionally, they questioned why, if one of them had fled, they hadn't taken any personal belongings, such as phones, bank cards, or Russell's essential medication. The evidence clearly suggested a break-in and foul play by a third party, but the investigation still lacked concrete leads or evidence pointing to a specific direction. 2 weeks after Russell and Rebecca's disappearance, another disturbing crime shook the quiet town of Willard. Police received a frantic call from a man who reported finding his elderly neighbors, Donald and Helena Willingham, brutally killed in their home. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered the couple had been fatally stabbed in their bedroom. The similarities to the Porter case were immediately apparent. In both instances, the intruder had entered the home at night, catching the victims while they were asleep. In neither case were any valuable items stolen, suggesting that the crimes were driven by personal motives rather than robbery. However, in the Willingham case, the intruder had left the bodies behind and had not attempted to clean up the evidence. The unsettling parallels between the two crimes raised new questions. Could the same person or group have been involved in both cases? And if so, what was their motive? Investigators doubled their efforts, now searching for connections between the two households and any clues that could shed light on who might have been responsible for these heinous acts. Both cases stalled for nearly 3 months, with no new leads until July 2011. That was when law enforcement's attention shifted to a young man named Jose Huckleberry. Jose was an undocumented migrant who traveled between states committing various offenses. He had been caught during a burglary in Arkansas, a state neighboring Missouri. During an extended interrogation, investigators uncovered details of more disturbing crimes connected to him. As it turned out, Jose had broken into the home of Helena and Donald Willingham several months earlier, intending to rob them. However, when Helena raised the alarm, alerting neighbors, Jose panicked and attacked the elderly couple. One neighbor even chased him as he fled the Willingham residence, but was unable to catch him. Jose admitted to the crime, expressing remorse and sharing grisly details about the incident, details that only the perpetrator could know. Despite his confession regarding the Willingham case, Jose adamantly denied any involvement in the disappearance of Russell and Rebecca Porter. He claimed he had no idea who they were, had never been to their home, and had nothing to do with their case. Investigators found no evidence linking him to the porter's disappearance, and his alibi for the night they went missing was confirmed. As a result, Jose was ruled out as a suspect. In September 2011, a prison informant provided police with a critical lead in the Porter investigation. The informant claimed to have shared a cell with a repeat offender named Tony Hicks, who was in custody for distributing prohibited substances. According to the informant, Tony boasted about killing a farmer and his wife, adding that no one would ever find their bodies. Initially, detectives were skeptical. They suspected Tony was fabricating the story to bolster his reputation in prison. However, the tip couldn't be ignored, so they brought Tony in for questioning. As expected, Tony immediately denied any involvement with the porter's disappearance, claiming he had nothing to do with the case. Yet his behavior suggested he was uneasy, and investigators felt they might be on to something significant. A request was made to trace the location of Tony's cell phone on the night the porters vanished. Records revealed that his phone had pinged near their home, but was turned off around 12:30 a.m. This raised further suspicions. Tony had an extensive criminal history, including convictions for burglary, robbery, possession of weapons, and trafficking prohibited substances. He also frequently carried out his crimes with his younger brother, Dusty, who had been incarcerated for several months at the time of the investigation. This new information gave investigators hope that they were finally closing in on answers about what had happened to Russell and Rebecca Porter. During a subsequent interrogation, Dusty decided to cooperate with the police and claimed he had something important to show them. He revealed that his brother, Tony, had a secret location in the woods that concealed a dark truth. Dusty led detectives to a dilapidated old cabin hidden deep in the forest. As they approached, a sickening odor became noticeable, and upon entering, the stench of decay was overwhelming. Inside the cabin, investigators found a shallow cellar beneath the wooden floorboards. Buried under dirt and debris were two heavily decomposed bodies. Detectives suspected the remains belonged to the missing couple, Russell and Rebecca Porter. Given the advanced state of decomposition, more than 4 months had passed since their disappearance. Visual identification was impossible. A DNA analysis was conducted, and it conclusively confirmed that the bodies were indeed those of the Porters. Forensic examination revealed that the couple had been killed by close-range gunshots to the head, likely from a high-caliber weapon. The amount of blood on the wooden floor and walls of the cabin suggested the crime had occurred there. Additionally, Russell had suffered a broken nose and arm, indicating he had put up a fierce struggle in a desperate attempt to protect himself and Rebecca. Tragically, their efforts were no match for their attackers, and the couple paid the ultimate price. With this discovery, the case was officially reclassified from a disappearance to a double homicide. Authorities now had their suspects in custody, but needed to determine the motive and piece together the chain of events to fully understand the crime. The fact that the couple was still in their pajamas suggested they had been ambushed while asleep. But how and why did they end up so far from their home? Dusty insisted he had no direct involvement in the murders. He claimed to have only known about his brother's cabin and heard rumors that bodies might be hidden there, but he wasn't certain. However, the investigation uncovered evidence implicating him as an accomplice. It was revealed that Tony had enlisted not only Dusty's help, but also that of his common-law wife, Wendy, and their 19-year-old son, Philip, all of whom had ties to criminal activity. Cell phone records placed all 4 suspects near the Porters' home on the night of their disappearance. Strikingly, all 4 phones were powered off almost simultaneously, further raising suspicion. Tony, who was aware of the Porters' surveillance system, cut the exterior camera cable. This triggered a security alert to the monitoring service, but for reasons still unclear, the alert was never followed up on. The group gained access to the house by slicing through the screen of an open window. They proceeded to the bedroom where Russell and Rebecca were asleep. Tony, carrying a weapon, commanded the couple to get up. When the attackers tried to restrain them using zip ties, Russell fought back, sparking a violent altercation that left him with a broken nose and arm. Despite his resistance, the intruders eventually overpowered and bound the couple, then forced them out of the house. They were transported in a pickup truck owned by the Hicks family to a secluded cabin deep in the woods. There, both were executed with single gunshots to the head, and their bodies were discarded in the cabin's shallow cellar, only loosely covered with dirt and debris. This disturbing revelation clarified what had happened to Russell and Rebecca Porter, but investigators still needed to determine the motive behind the attack and whether others were involved. After the murders, the perpetrators returned to the Porters' home to eliminate any incriminating evidence and to recover the computer tower that stored footage from the property's surveillance system. These recordings could have captured the suspects and their vehicle. The bedroom was thoroughly cleaned with bleach, which they had brought with them, and the empty bottles were taken away. When Tony was asked why they committed such a heinous crime, he revealed that there had been a client who offered him $100,000 to make the Porters disappear without a trace. Tony admitted he was eager to accept the job, but feared he couldn't handle 2 adults on his own. To ensure success, he recruited a team of family members who were all struggling financially. The mysterious client turned out to be Robert Campbell, the uncle who had long coveted the farm left to Russell by his grandfather. Robert provided detailed instructions including information about the surveillance cameras and even paid in advance of $20,000. He carefully crafted an alibi, taking his wife on a trip to another city for several days. Investigators later discovered that his wife was aware of his plan. Law enforcement arrested the client and all 4 participants, charging them with premeditated double homicide, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and perjury. Each of the accused attempted to downplay their role in the crime, but none managed to avoid punishment. In April 2013, 2 years after the horrific events, Tony and Dusty Hicks were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Wendy Hicks, Tony's wife, received the same sentence. Their son, who admitted to his involvement and cooperated with authorities, was given a 13-year prison term. Robert Campbell continued to deny any role in the crime, and because the case against him relied largely on circumstantial evidence, his trial was repeatedly delayed. Eventually, in February, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. His wife, who faced charges of aiding and abetting as well as perjury, died by suicide shortly after Robert's arrest, never making it to trial. Moving on to the next case. Wendy's mother. A holiday took a tragic turn when a mother awoke with a sense of dread, and her instincts proved right. The horrific events of that night would remain a mystery for 36 years. But back in 1984, a young girl vowed to help bring the culprit to justice, and years later, she did, working as an investigator. On Thanksgiving night in 1984, 14-year-old Wendy Jerome left a friend's house in Rochester, New York, but never made it home. Earlier that day, Wendy and her father, Wayne, had cooked Thanksgiving dinner together. It was a touching family moment. Wendy's mother, Marlene, worked long hours as a nurse at Beechwood Nursing Home. After dinner, Wendy helped her father with the dishes while her mother went upstairs to rest. The family had planned to enjoy dessert together once the dishes were done and Marlene had woken from her nap. Her little brother Bill was playing. Born on November 1, 1970, Wendy had just turned 14 years old a few days ago. She had some independence since her birthday and wanted to do things on her own. Wendy asked her father if she could walk over to her friend Susie Keller's house. It was not that far, just a few blocks away. It was her friend's birthday the following day, and Wendy wanted to give her a birthday card. Wayne allowed it since her curfew was 8 p.m. anyway, and it was 7, which meant she would be back in no time. Waking up with a sudden overwhelming urge to find her daughter, Marlene was uneasy. She had a bad feeling and ran down the stairs hastily asking, "Where is Wendy?" Wayne reassured Marlene that Wendy was visiting a friend and would be home soon, urging her not to worry. By 8:15 p.m., panic set in as Wendy was still not home. It was only 15 minutes past her curfew, but it was still worrisome as she was never late. Early maybe, but never late. They began calling the Keller family, but received no answer. Hours passed before they finally reached them. Marlene's first question was, "Is Wendy with you?" Susie's mother paused in shock before replying, "Marlene, hang up the phone and call the police right now." Soon after, Marlene's worst fears became reality. Wendy's body was discovered in an alcove near School 33. A 22-year-old man found her between schools 33 and 11. He later explained that he had been on his way to a bar when he noticed someone lying down and initially assumed the person was intoxicated. When he took a closer look and saw blood, he became frightened and went to a friend's house. He later returned to confirm what he had seen and then contacted the police. Officers arrived at the scene and determined that Wendy was already gone. She had been brutally assaulted and left to die alone. Within 5 minutes, officers were at Marlene's door delivering the devastating news. Marlene later stated that the area where Wendy was found was not along her usual path to Susie's house. Marlene believes that Wendy, nearing her curfew, may have attempted to visit another friend in the neighborhood and took a shortcut by the school. The initial investigation revealed severe blunt force trauma, including a fractured skull from a significant blow. She had been assaulted. Dr. Nicholas Forbes conducted a medical examination of Wendy's body and determined that severe blunt force trauma to her skull had finally taken her life. Wendy's autopsy further revealed that at least 2 different types of objects were used to cause her bruises and wounds. Trauma caused by something that would cut through her body. It could have been a knife or a piece of glass. The family could not overcome this tragedy. Wayne and Marlene divorced because deep down she blamed her husband for what happened. Bill Jerome, Wendy's brother, was afraid of everything after his elder sister was so brutally taken. He was afraid that the assailant was still out there running free. For the first time in his life, he was afraid of the dark. He would hardly go out to play, and when he did, he was afraid and wary of everyone around him. After the divorce, Wayne moved to Florida. Marlene was not content with what the police were doing. Nearly a decade passed, and Marlene fought hard to know more details of the night. She was not allowed to see the crime scene, visit the body in the morgue, or even look at the photos. Marlene demanded to see the crime scene photos after investigators had informed her that Wendy was unconscious and unaware of what had happened to her that day. They said she passed peacefully. Once she got a copy of the autopsy report, it turned out she was in the dark. Reading the autopsy report repeatedly mentioning defense wounds, Marlene became furious. She felt betrayed, believing they had misled her when she had directly asked them about Wendy's struggle with her assailant. She felt deeply betrayed. Once she saw the photos, she had some closure. She had imagined Wendy to be lying exposed for the world to see, undressed, indecent, in a way she would never have wanted to be seen. Marlene suffered for 9 long years before she saw the photos and found a bit of comfort. The photos also showed Marlene what investigators had known all along. Wendy had been dressed, wearing jeans and a brown sweater jacket adorned with unicorns and hearts. Her pink hoodie, which she always carried with her, was placed over her battered face. So whoever committed the heinous act allowed Wendy to get dressed before taking her life so brutally. The investigators had promised Marlene that Wendy went in peace and knew nothing of what happened to her later, including all the blows to her head. But the presence of defensive wounds told a story of absolute terror, as Wendy would have fought for her life. Completely aware of what was happening to her, contrary to what the investigators told Marlene. Each birthday, November, it was hard for the family. They would cry, and they would miss Wendy. Marlene held on to the belief that one day the person responsible would face justice. During the 1980s and 1990s, DNA technology was still in its early stages, but advancements in forensic science would eventually offer new hope. 6 days after Wendy's death, Officer Paul Boccaccino interviewed at least 30 people from the neighborhood. Investigators also made a point to carefully preserve the physical evidence. The crime scene yielded several items, including a cigarette pack, a lighter, the perpetrator's hair, and Wendy's clothing. However, not all aspects of the case received thorough investigation. One witness was interviewed but not treated as a primary suspect, despite suspicious behavior. He initially went to a friend's house before returning to the scene and contacting authorities. Adding to the concern, his hair type matched the samples found at the crime scene. He should have been investigated further. 6 years later, he took his own life. Was that an admission of guilt? Initially, investigators focused on another local man who claimed he had been assaulted that night, but was eliminated via blood typing analysis. In 1984, when Julie Hahn was just 11 years old, she learned about the tragic slaying of Wendy Jerome, a case that would deeply impact her and eventually shape her career. Wendy's case haunted Rochester for years, becoming a significant part of the community's consciousness. This early exposure to such a haunting event instilled in Hahn a sense of justice and a drive to pursue a career where she could make a difference. Years later, she became a chief prosecutor in the Major Felony Bureau of the Monroe County District Attorney's Office. Her commitment to justice led her to work on Wendy's case starting in February 2011. She went through everything with a fresh perspective and was able to conduct DNA analysis. This included cross-checking the witness who took his own life's DNA. Should the DNA not match with the witness, Hahn had plans to analyze other items found at the scene, such as the cigarette pack and lighter, using advanced high-sensitivity DNA technology. In February 2016, Hahn and her team realized additional evidence could be tested. They conducted familial DNA testing in February. By July, there was a fresh list of potential suspects. There was evidence from Wendy's clothes and bodily secretions from the crime scene. In 2020, they were able to conduct a familial DNA search. It allows for screening through relatives' DNA profiles. This means anyone sharing the same blood in the family could be accessed if their relative's DNA was on the databank. It brought them to a person questioned all those years ago who was 20 years old at the time of Wendy's tragedy. His name was Timothy Williams, their next-door neighbor at the time. Police were able to collect a DNA sample from the suspect secretly while he was in Florida. The sample matched the DNA evidence from the crime scene. 36 years later, they finally had a positive match. Williams was finally arrested on September 9, 2020. Hahn was among the investigators who called Marlene. Marlene had remarried Wayne when he was diagnosed with cancer. He passed away in February 2011. 36 years after that Thanksgiving night, on a regular Thursday, she received the call she had longed for. Timothy Williams became the first person in the state to go on trial with an arrest relying on familial DNA. During the trial, Williams claimed he had consensual intimacy with Wendy and did not harm her. He expressed fear of being charged with forceful assault if he came forward. He had been questioned all those years ago. He was a neighbor back then, 20 years old, but he lied to the police. Now in custody, he told a very different story. He said he met her at a corner store and believed her to be of age and was in a relationship with her. However, the district attorney countered these claims, highlighting the brutal nature of Wendy's injuries which contradicted Williams' story. Wendy's mother had the following to say about his claims. "My daughter Wendy was the sweetest, the most caring little girl in the whole world. I just want everybody to know no matter what was said, it was not true, and she was and always will be my heart." The initial trial was derailed by a mistrial due to juror misconduct. However, in a later trial, Williams was convicted on 3 counts of second-degree murder. On April 17, 2024, New York State Supreme Court Justice Alex Renzi sentenced the 60-year-old to 25 years to life in the New York State Department of Corrections. District Attorney Dorothy expressed both relief and gratitude toward the Rochester police investigators, stating that the maximum sentence was the only fitting outcome. She emphasized that despite the passage of time, Timothy Williams did not evade accountability for the horrific crime he committed against Wendy. Marlene, Wendy's mother, was present during the court proceedings. After the verdict, she spoke of experiencing a bittersweet form of closure. For 36 years, Timothy Williams believed he had gotten away with it, but through Julie Hahn's determined investigation and Marlene's unwavering pursuit of justice, he was finally identified, exposed, and imprisoned. At last, Wendy Jerome's family could begin to find peace, and the shadow that had haunted them for decades was locked away. As the sentencing concluded, Marlene quietly asked, "Will it ever be over for me?" "No. But this door is closed." Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.